Let me come to you, Frederic. In your own research, in your own studies, what have you been able to put your fingers on as the fundamental root causes of political conflicts in Africa?
Thank you, Shaka. Well, what we're seeing is that the unequal distribution of resources on the continent is what is causing most of the conflicts. When I talk about unequal distribution of resources, I'm talking about politics, I'm talking about the unequal inequalities when it comes to economics. And then secondly, we're also seeing what we call state collapse, when there is no, when basically the state is not capable of protecting its citizen or implement the rule of law, justice. And then thirdly, what we're seeing is countries, when they do have a history of violence, when they have a history when there is a conflict that arises, when they use violence to resolve it. And finally, what we're also seeing is natural resources in general. For example, where there is natural resource scarcity, for example, when there is not enough land, when there is some groups try to get in some sort of grazing rights, for example, and we also see when there is also resources abundance, for example, oil does trigger, for example, conflicts.
Why should it trigger? I mean, a country like Chad, for example, about, from what I have seen, it's about anywhere between 9 to 10 million people.
Yes.
They have about, from what I see, again, 200 different ethnic and linguistic groups. Wouldn't you say, frankly, that the oil they have, if managed properly, would be able to help bring about a sense or a semblance of stability and development?
Yeah, I think that the ambassador will talk with regards to Chad a little bit more than I do, but here's what we're seeing. What we're seeing is that in most countries, what happens is that you have the elite which try to have a control over the resources. And when in the process of trying to gain control over the resources, what they do is that they discriminate other groups. Usually it starts by discriminating people from other ethnic groups, and then people who don't come from the same hill as they come from at the village, and then they even reduce it even more to a group of friends. And so that creates animosity, and when it creates animosity, people start protesting, and when they start protesting, then you have human rights abuses, then you have a crackdown on the press. Everything else comes from that, and then you have a situation where it becomes unbearable for the population, for political parties, and then you have a situation of conflict. And that is really something that we are seeing not only you know, in countries where there is you know, like the countries that we know, like the Great Lakes region, where there have been conflicts for a long time, but we're seeing it across the continent. Everything is about control of resources, and that's what triggers pretty much most of the conflicts.
The inequitable, perhaps, distribution even of available resources?
Yes, absolutely.
And perhaps also the disproportionate access or lack of access to opportunities?
Yes.
Perhaps state employment or positions.
Yes.
But the ambassador has just said that since President Deby came to power, the situation has fundamentally changed. For example, he says that now they have multi-party democracy, correct? He also said that the media is relatively, you know, is free. And yet, from what I see, the rebels, in fact, are saying they are fighting for social justice and democracy. What does that mean?
Well, what I can tell you is that most rebel movements that we've seen on the continent are all talking about democracy, social justice, and so on. But what we've also seen is that when they get into power, they exactly do the same thing that they were fighting against. Hold
your point. We'll come back.
Yes.
We'll pause for a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion. So please, don't go away. Before the break, I had the dubious privilege to interject. Frederic, I'm sorry for that. I hope you'll find some space in your beautiful heart. Forgive me for that.
It's okay.
You were trying to explain a point about how rebels take up arms, saying that they are fighting for these lofty ideas like democracy, social justice, and yet when they get into power, they become just like the people they removed, and in some cases worse.
Yes.
In fact, there are people who say that most rebels are really trying to change the government precisely because they want a piece of the action. They want groceries, really. They wanted unfettered access to groceries.
Exactly. This brings me back to my point of it's all about control of resources, really. What we're seeing actually on the continent is that we're dealing with rebel groups, is that they fight claiming to be fighting for democracy, and in some cases they do have good arguments. But when they get into power, it's all about controlling the few resources that are there, and basically I call it when is my time to eat philosophy.
Right.
That's really pretty much what.
So it is the politics of the stomach.
It is the politics of
the belly.
It is the politics of the belly, and it's somewhat unfortunate because being an African myself, you would think that once you are there, when you have few resources, what do? You diversify your economy so that you can have more resources and distribute in order to avoid a situation of conflict. But in some ways, if you think about it, it's not even selfish what they're doing, because they're going to end up creating even more conflicts in the long run. Because if you're perpetuating the same problem, you will have the same problems in the long run.